Welcome to the third installment of Should You Play It, a segment brought to you by Board Game Co. in association with Board Online, Board Offline. In Should You Play It, I take a game, preferably one that I've played quite a bit. I go over quickly how we play it, the basics of the game, and then I give you 5 reasons why you might like it and 5 reasons why you might not like it to help you decide if this game is for you. Today's game is Pandemic Legacy, Season 1, 2, really these arguments all apply to both of them. In place of the box, because I've gotten rid of the box being a legacy game, I have this nice broken token crate for Pandemic and my Pandemic game, just so I have something to show you while I talk. In any case, Pandemic Legacy at its core, the basic of the game is that it's Pandemic, if you don't know much about it, and then they put the legacy system on top of it. Now Pandemic, the core gameplay is it's a cooperative game. You take your little guys, you move them around the board, just pawns really, but you take your action token, move it around the board, taking actions as you go, and like most cooperative games, you and your friends do things that help you win, followed by the game doing stuff that helps you lose. So in Pandemic, those main things you're going to be doing is you're going to be traveling, you can fly to different cities, you can fly from cities to other cities, you can cure disease, and you can research a cure. When you do that, you'll hopefully help yourself win. If you can eradicate a disease, it'll help you win. And once you've cured 4 diseases, you will successfully win the game. So we take the core gameplay in Pandemic Legacy, takes Pandemic, and then it puts a legacy game on top of that. The legacy game takes Pandemic, and each time you finish a game, you read some new rules, you read some new story, you figure out something else that's happening that expands upon the gameplay. Now, as far as the reasons you should play it, starting with reason number 1, is if you like cooperative games, or more specifically, if you like Pandemic, you should definitely give Pandemic Legacy a try. Pandemic Legacy takes everything that's good about Pandemic and makes it better. There are people who do not feel this way, but from what I've seen, they are the exception, the small exception. For the most part, if anything, I would say Pandemic Legacy has often ruined Pandemic for people. Pandemic Legacy takes an incredible game and makes it better. It makes that game. It gives you that core gameplay, followed by story, followed by immersion, followed by things that drag you in and pull you into the game. And speaking of this, a 6th reason why you shouldn't play it would be because it makes Pandemic worse. It's not actually on my list, but it does make Pandemic as a game a little less appealing. So yes, if you like cooperative games, you like Pandemic, give Pandemic Legacy a try. Reason number 2 is if you like emergent gameplay, if you like gameplay that evolves as you play it, whether through story or through rules, but if you like that, if you find that appealing, if you find that interesting, if you've played Mechs and Minions, and every time there's a new rule that comes out, you're like, ooh, this is fun and exciting, Pandemic Legacy is for you. Pandemic Legacy adds new rules every game or 2 as you go through the game. So one game you're curing diseases, the next game you're doing X, the next game you're doing Y. X and Y are my way of remaining spoiler-free doing this review. But emergent gameplay is definitely a part of it. If you enjoy that, if you enjoy the process of a non-static game, Pandemic Legacy is very much for you. Reason number 3 is if you like thematic co-ops, then Pandemic Legacy is a great game to try. This applies equally to Pandemic really, but as I mentioned already, cooperative games tend to fall into this pattern of you do stuff, board game does bad stuff. And depending on how it's played out, it can sometimes feel a bit contrived. It can feel like, well, that's just a system we needed to build. Pandemic is one of the faces of cooperative games, and for good reason. And part of that is because of how smoothly the game flows. Every game you're eradicating disease, but then every round new diseases are coming out and making it harder to eradicate. But the more specific way the game does it in the mechanic style is that each time you pull a disease card, it is statistically more likely to be places that have been ravaged by disease. So this isn't like Flashpoint, and Flashpoint is a good game, but this isn't like Flashpoint where you roll 2 dice and then a fire pops up somewhere on the board completely randomly. Rather, this is a game where the disease inherently is more powerful. It's more likely to strike in areas where disease has ravaged the board. It is very thematic in the way that comes through. And if you like your co-op games to feel like they were meant to be and not feel like a system that someone had to put together, then Pandemic and Pandemic Legacy are both games you should give a shot. Reason number 4 is if you like legacy games, but you want a legacy game that feels more legacy, Pandemic Legacy is one of the best in this manner. Now, what do I mean by more legacy? I mean that legacy games inherently are just taking a system and then breaking it to a certain extent. Now, very often not very often, sometimes legacy games can feel contrived. Similar to the way I mentioned co-op games can feel a bit contrived, legacy games have that problem as well. Sometimes it feels like for the sake of putting together a game that you can only play once, they put together a game that you can only play once. Some legacy games, on the other hand, really feel like everything you do had to be that way. And a big part of that is the board. A big part of that is the fact that you have a board that you're constantly applying stickers to and changing things. It really feels like everything you're doing is having an effect on the next game, as opposed to feeling like a sequence of gameplay with new rules added. So an example, counterexamples of this would be End Legacy or Machiko Legacy. While enjoyable games, they feel a bit more contrived. They don't feel as meaningful or impactful in the legacy system. Contrast that with Pandemic Legacy, where every game you play is going to have the permanent effects of all the bad things that happened. The board will frequently feel like every single thing that you did, every single thing that you allowed to happen is staring you in the face. It feels as legacy gets. It really, really drives home how impactful your decisions are and how they will hurt you and help you in different ways. I've played a bunch of legacy games by now, and I think I can say with a fair degree of confidence that Pandemic Legacy feels the most impactful and legacy of any of the legacy games I've played to date. Reason number 5 is if you enjoy having a low cost per play, give Pandemic Legacy a try. Now, this is actually a little bit counterintuitive, because one of the things that people complain about on legacy games, and we'll get to that on our con list, is the fact that you're buying a game and that you're going to destroy it. So that makes it more expensive. But I can say that Pandemic Legacy and most legacy games that I've played, and most legacy games that others have played, they have a much lower cost per play than most games in your collection. Let's pick a random game off my shelf. Innis. Innis is an incredible game, and I doubt I've played Innis, and this is one of my most played games. I doubt I've played Innis as much as I've played Pandemic Legacy. Endeavor, a great game, super expensive. I think I've played this 5 times, and I've had it for a year and a half. Rurik, an amazing game. I think I've played it less than 10 times. Most games, even the games I really enjoy, will not see the table as much as a legacy game will. A legacy game, through the narrative, through the fact that the game's changing all the time, it really pushes you to continuously play the game, and you really end up with a much lower cost per play than most games in your collection. You want to feel like there's bang for your buck, legacy games will give that to you. And Pandemic Legacy, I've played it 3 times now. I've played Season 1 twice and Season 2 once, and I think each time I came in at roughly 20 plays. That is more than most games in my collection even if you factor in my 8 years in the hobby. Sure, smaller games are exceptions, but any bigger game, Pandemic Legacy and legacy games see a lot more play. As far as reasons why you may not be a game for you or your group, reason number 1 would be that it is a legacy game and you're destroying it. Now, this is the direct counter to my previous point. While I would disagree that a legacy game that you enjoy, that you play, that you then destroy, wasn't worth it, because the cost per play is amazing. So first of all, I will acknowledge that it can feel like you're getting rid of something. It can feel more frustrating, even though your cost per play is better. But on the other hand, if you don't like it, that is an expensive game. If you buy Innis and you don't like it, you can trade it to us at Board Game Co. You can sell it to us at Board Game Co. or to anyone else, but you can sell or trade these games that you get, and you lose a little bit on the exchange, but sure, it's not a big deal. You get your value back. If you buy a legacy game and you give it a shot and it's not for you, you are out the full cost of the game. If you can't stomach that investment and the fact that you might lose out like that, legacy games may not be for you. I've played a bunch of legacy games. Most of them I have thoroughly enjoyed, but there have been 1 or 2 that is a little bit more on the fence, and it's unfortunate. You're kind of locked into forcing yourself to play a mediocre experience, or giving it up and feeling like you lost out on the value. And that is a big reason why legacy games in particular, and legacy games in general, may not be for you. Reason number 2 is if you have a lack of a consistent game group. And there are different games that have different campaigns or legacy systems that have this effect to varying degrees, but like using ANZ Legacy, like I referenced earlier, ANZ Legacy comes in at roughly 7 to 8 games, if I recall correctly, and that's not nearly as problematic to get your group to the table with. Versus Pandemic Legacy, at 20 games, in the range of 12 to 24 games, but 20 has been my average. You have to have a group that is willing to play that consistently. Now, you could just play it with your spouse. It works great as a 2-player game, works great as a 4-player game. I've done both. I haven't done 3 yet, and I haven't done 1. But if you don't have a consistent group or person to play it with, that is a big commitment, and it will not see the table often, and it won't be worth getting. And I can tell you from having played it in different degrees of time, I recommend getting these games done in 3 months or less. If you let it drag out for 6 months or more, the story tends to lose its focus, and it tends to feel a little bit more like a chore towards the end as opposed to an experience that you ratcheted through. So if you don't have the right people to play this game with, then it's just not for you. Reason number 3 is the alpha leader problem. Now, Pandemic is the face of co-op games to begin with, and Pandemic Legacy is the face of legacy games, and it's an amazing experience. But at the end of the day, while many cooperative games have done a better and better job at fixing the alpha leader problem in different ways, Spirit Island makes it inherently complex. Project Elite is a timed game, so there's no time to really focus on tons of collaboration and alpha leader. Different games have done this in different degrees and different ways to fix the alpha leader problem, but Pandemic is a game that very much suffers from the alpha leader problem. And for those that don't know, the alpha leader problem is the idea that one player effectively plays the game for everyone else. That as you're playing the game, he or she sits there and says, oh, well, really you should move your character this way, and if you do this and this and cure those 2 diseases, well, then we're safe. And they're constantly teaching everyone to play, and they may as well be playing solo, and you, as the bystander, kind of feel like you're not really needed, and you're just there to improve his game experience or her game experience. Pandemic does have this problem in spades. Pandemic Legacy is unfortunately no exception. It is a great game, but that is definitely a flaw and a reason why it might not be for you. Reason number 4 is that if you don't like having your own strategy and your own success thrown back in your face, this may not be for you. Now, this one's a bit tricky to cover without going through spoilers, but in short, what I'll say is that Pandemic Legacy is a game that if you've had particularly good early games, there are times and ways in which your own success might make it harder for you later in the game. I'm not going to overly go into it because I want to avoid spoilers, but if you feel punished for having done too well, that can happen. And honestly, even before we get to the spoilers, the basic system of Pandemic Legacy gives you that the more you do well, the more you get good things taken away from you. So both in terms of that and in terms of the spoiler part of things, the better you do, the more it can be thrown back in your face later. For myself, I enjoy that. I didn't mind it at all, but if you feel punished for doing better, yes, that's a reason why it may not be a game for you. And finally, and this is a big one unfortunately, is if you don't want an anticlimactic experience, Pandemic Legacy, I believe, for me, was all 3 times anticlimactic. Now, what I mean by that is a thoroughly enjoyable game. I'm looking forward to Season 3. I really enjoyed it. I want to get it back. I highly recommend it. But it is a game that hits a story arc towards the latter third of the experience, and then kind of the last game or 2 feels a little bit anticlimactic. And that's for a few reasons. Part of it is the nature of the gameplay itself, and part of it is that how do you gauge a win or a loss in a co-op legacy game? If you win all the first games and you lose the last, did you lose the experience? If you lose all the first games and you win the last, did you win the experience? And so you end up going towards the end here, and you get this scorecard that tells you how you did, and it's basically just a score. You may have actually won most of the game, and then when it came down to the end, you just couldn't get it done, and that can be frustrating. And the flip side is if you lost all the games and you kind of win the last game, it doesn't feel rewarding. The end of Pandemic Legacy is a bit anticlimactic when compared to how thoroughly enjoyable the rest of the experience was. It's still a great game. I still recommend it, but it's definitely a con. It's definitely something to keep in mind. You're gonna hit, oh, this game is great, better, amazing, and those last few games will go down a bit. So there you have it. Those are my 5 reasons why you might like Pandemic Legacy and 5 reasons why you might not. If you can bite the bullet on those reasons why it's not a good experience, if those don't scare you off, give it a shot. I thoroughly enjoyed it. I've played Season 1 twice, which isn't something everyone can say. I played with my game group, and then my wife enjoyed it after. That's basically it. This is Why You Should Play It by Board Game Co. in association with Board Online, Board Offline. You can drop by our own site, boardgameco.com. You can drop by our YouTube channel and subscribe. The link should be down below. You can subscribe to our YouTube channel and watch other videos. If you have any ideas or games you'd like to see next, I'm more than happy to give it a shot. I will note in this segment, more so than some of my other videos, I only do videos of games that I've played a bunch of times. If I'm going to go into a deep dive of why it's for you or not for you, then I feel I have to have played it a significant number of times, although significant is a wiggle room number. In any case, that's pretty much it, and until next time, have a good one.